Counsel, with his index finger still in the place in his brief where he had been interrupted, rose to his feet again and turned to the jury. Birchill returned to the flat at Westminster shortly after midnight, he continued. Hill had been compelled by Birchill's threats to remain at the flat with the girl while Birchill visited Riversbrook, and the first thing Birchill told him on his return was that he had found Sir Horace Fewbanks dead in his house when he entered it. On his way back from committing the crime, belated caution had probably dictated to Birchill the wisdom of endeavouring to counteract his previous threat to murder Sir Horace Fewbanks. He probably remembered that Hill, who had heard the threat, was an unwilling participator in the plan for the burglary, and might therefore denounce him to the police for the greater crime if he, Birchill, admitted that he had committed it. In order to guard against this contingency, still further Birchill forced Hill to join in writing a letter to Scotland Yard, acquainting him with the murder and the fact that the body was lying in the empty house. Birchill's object in acting thus was a twofold one. He dared not trust Hill to pretend to discover the body the next day and give information to the police for fear he should not be able to retain sufficient control of himself to convince the detectives that he was wholly ignorant of the crime, and he also thought that if Hill had a share in writing the letter he would feel an additional complicity in the crime and keep silence for his own sake. Birchill was right in his calculations up to a point. Hill was at first too frightened to disclose what he knew. But as time went on, his affection for his murder master and his desire to bring the murderer to justice overcame his feelings of fear for his own share in bringing about the crime, and he went and confessed everything to the police, regardless of the consequences that might recoil upon his own head. The case against Birchill depends largely on Hill's evidence, and the jury, when they have heard his story in the witness box, and bearing in mind the extenuating circumstances of his connection with the crime, will have little hesitation in coming to the conclusion that the prisoner in the dock murdered Sir Horace Fewbanks. The first witness called was Inspector Selden, who gave evidence as to his visit to Riversbrook shortly before 1 p.m. on the 19th of August, as a result of information received, and his discovery of the dead body of Sir Horace Fewbanks. He described the room in which the body was found, the position of the body, and he identified the blood-stained clothes produced by the prosecution as being those in which the dead man was dressed when the body was discovered. In cross-examination by Holymead, he stated that Sir Horace Fewbanks was fully dressed when the body was found. The witness also stated in cross-examination that none of the electric lights in the house were burning when the body was discovered. The next witness was Dr. Slingsby, the pathological expert from the Home Office who had made the post-mortem examination, and who was much too great a man to be kept waiting while other witnesses of more importance to the case, but of less personal consequence, went into the box. Dr. Slingsby stated that his examinations had revealed that the death had been caused by a bullet wound which had penetrated the left lung, causing internal hemorrhage. Mr. Finnis, the junior counsel for the defense, suggested to the witness that the wound might have been self-inflicted, but Dr. Slingsby permitted himself to be positive that such was not the case. With professional caution he assured Mr. Finnis, who briefly cross-examined him, that it was impossible for him to state how long Sir Horace Fewbanks had been dead. Rigor mortis in the case of the human body set in from 8 to 10 hours after death, and it was between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the day the crime was discovered that he first saw the corpse. The body was quite stiff and cold then. Is it not possible for death to have taken place 19 or 20 hours before you saw the body? Asked Mr. Finnis eagerly. Quite possible, replied Dr. Slingsby. Is it not also possible, from the state of the body when you examined it, that death took place within 16 hours of your examination of the body? Asked Mr. Walters, as Mr. Finnis sat down with the air of a man who had elicited an important point. Quite possible, replied Dr. Slingsby. with the prim air of a professional man who valued his reputation too highly to risk it by committing himself to anything definite. Dr. Slingsby was allowed to leave the box, and Inspector Chippenfield took his place. Inspector Chippenfield did not display any professional reticence about giving his evidence, at least not on the surface, though he by no means took the court completely into his confidence as to all that had passed between him and Hill. On the other hand, he told the judge and jury everything that his professional experience prompted him as necessary and proper for them to know in order to bring about a conviction. In the course of his evidence he made several attempts to introduce damaging facts as to Birchill's past, but Mr. Holymead protested to the judge. Counsel for the defense protested that he had allowed his learned friend in opening the case a great deal of latitude as to the relations which had previously existed between the witness Hill and the prisoner, because the defense did not intend to attempt to hide the fact that the prisoner had a criminal record. But he had no intention of allowing a police witness to introduce irrelevant matter in order to prejudice the jury against the prisoner. His Honor told the witness to confine himself to answering the questions put to him, and not to volunteer information. After this rebuke, Inspector Chippenfield resumed giving evidence. He related what Birchill had said when arrested, and declared that he was positive that the footprints found outside the kitchen window were made by the boots produced in court, which Birchill had been wearing at the time he was arrested. He produced a jemmy which he had found at Fanning's flat, and said that it fitted the marks on the window at Riversbrook, which had been forced on the night of the 18th of August. Inspector Chippenfield's evidence was followed by that of the two tramway employees, who declared that, to the best of their belief, Birchill was the man who boarded their tram at 9:30 on the night of the 18th of August, and rode to the terminus at Hampstead, which they reached at 10:04 p.m. Both the witnesses showed a very proper respect for the law, and were obviously relieved when the brief cross-examination was over, and they were free to go back to their tram car. End of chapter 16.